So what is no-dig gardening? Very simply, it's about creating and maintaining beds without digging, okay? And for existing beds, they are maintained by mulching. And to create new beds, they are created by laying a layer of light-suppressing material on the ground to kill off the grass and weeds by starving them of light. Basically, that's very simply. So why would we choose to avoid digging? Okay, there's the three most obvious reasons. Digging takes time and physical effort. Many people are getting older and have aches and pains and back problems. So that's reason enough for many of you. Secondly, digging actually increases weeds, which some of you may have experienced yourself. Disturbing the ground stimulates seeds to germinate, and it also chops up perennial weeds, so you end up with more weeds. Okay. Thirdly, digging disturbs the natural structure and the organisms like worms and beetles. You've probably all dug into ground and disturbed worms, and I don't think anyone wants to do that. It's upsetting. So those are the most obvious ones, and there are some more. Oh, what have I done here? Okay. So meanwhile, there are the benefits of not digging. Soil structure, I mentioned before, I've mentioned it here. Soil naturally has its own structure and life, and we can build on that by feeding the surface and not disturbing below. Okay, so by doing that, by not digging, we end up with improved drainage and better moisture retention, no compacted layers, and beneficial fungi, mycorrhizals, which you may all have heard about, which grow under the surface, are free to flourish, and they're good. I won't go into detail because I've got photos to show you. So before we start gardening, as I said, the soil already has its own structure. We can build on that, and the natural structure is better than anything that we can create by digging. Okay, the worms aerate the soil, the grass makes its own holes in the soil, and all the creatures in there spread the food around, basically, inside the soil. Okay. Also, as I mentioned before, weeds. There are generally fewer weeds in a no-dig garden, and they're easier to hoe or to pull out. Okay. The plants are generally healthier and more productive. There's a chap called Charles Dowding, who is the no-dig guru. He's been doing it for about 35 years. He has ongoing trials. He has a dug bed and a no-dug bed, and every year he compares them, and every year it demonstrates that the plants are healthier and the produce is greater. Okay, so you get more produce for less work, more produce for more compost that you add, and healthier plants, basically. Okay. It's easy to sow and re-sow at any time of year because you don't have to dig the beds. You can just twist out the old plants and pop in new plants, modules, which I think everyone probably... Does everyone know what modules means? I think you all look like savvy gardeners. Okay. You don't? Yes, plug plants, or plants that you've grown in little pots, pre-prepared. Pop them in. Okay. Something I learnt about recently, carbon stays in the soil rather than being released into the atmosphere. Oops, do that. When you dig, yes, you release carbon in the form of CO2. I don't have to say any more about that. I think we understand the global implications. Okay. And finally, myself and my husband think that it tastes better. It's not proved, but that's what we think. Okay. So there are many gardening myths, and the need to dig beds is one of them. So let's dispel the common digging myths specifically. Okay, but don't I need to dig to loosen the soil for roots? No, you don't. Plants prefer firm soil for their roots. Okay, but don't I need to dig to aerate the soil? No, worms do it better. Okay, don't I need to dig to incorporate compost and manure? Again, the worms do it better. To remove and bury weeds, again, mulch does it better. Okay, and finally, to create a tilth, don't I need to dig to create a nice tilth for sowing on the surface? No, this is much better created naturally by Nodig and without damage to the soil. So, in conclusion, let nature do the work. Okay, so that's the theory. How do we start? As I said before, if you've already got beds, it's very easy to convert. Remove the perennial weeds as best you can. Oh, now I brought a tool with me, I'll show you later. I use a dandelion digger, which is like a big screwdriver, which is great for getting out the roots of plants without disturbing the rest of the soil. Okay, so remove the perennial weeds and mulch in autumn with about 1 inch or 2 of compost. That's all you need to do. It's best to apply compost in the autumn because that gives time for the winter to break it down and for the worms to incorporate it into the soil. But actually, you can apply it any time of year. That works fine. I usually forget to do it in the autumn, so it works fine. Yeah, exactly. So converting is really easy if you've already got beds. To create new beds, okay, this is where I started 4 years ago, before I did anything. Okay, to create new beds, you basically will need some light suppressing material to kill off the weeds and grass, okay? And while you're doing that, you can even grow crops on top of that layer while the grass below dies. Potatoes and winter squash are good examples of these, and I will show you photos of how I did that later, okay? So this is what I began with. Grass, basically, some bindweed, some docks, nettles, couch grass, cooch grass. So it's good to start clean before you make your beds, but that process can be a gradual process. Take out the perennial weeds that you can see, and then docks, nettles, dandelions, brambles, etc. But then you're going to cover the grass to kill it off. And so what I did here, I'm going to show you. Okay, oh yes, so this is my dandelion weeder. These are some of the things I used. Wood chip pile, I'll talk about that later. Bag of compost if you don't have enough of your own. This man is very useful. Look him up afterwards if you want to learn. He's been doing it for 35 years. Okay, so because I didn't know I was going to be doing a talk, I don't have any photos in between this. So I'm going to show you what I did. So starting off with that in August, and this is how it looked in April. So basically I collected a load of cardboard. You can get nice big pieces of cardboard from bike shops and furniture shops. Spread it on the grass here. Had some nice deep beds, raised beds, which are half hugel beds. Penny will talk to you about that later. I half filled them with rotten wood and twigs and grass, and then the top half filled with compost. And they're ready to go straight away. So in September, I spread polythene, cardboard over the rest of the grass and then gradually let it die down. And during that time, I had a look, I lifted the covers to check how the weeds were doing. And it was the grass died off very quickly, and then the bindweed and docks were very obviously starving, and they were still there, but very easy to pick out at that point. So I picked them out and then covered it with more cardboard because I had a lot of cardboard. I got a bit obsessed about collecting cardboard. So anyway, so I covered it with more cardboard and polythene, and that in the spring, that's what it looked like. This here is potato bed, which I planted in March. So cardboard on the ground, slits in for the potatoes, pop the potato in the slit on the ground, covered it with 2 inches of compost, and then grass cuttings from my neighbour, which I discovered were abundant and free and very good for mulching. So, and below here, this is more cardboard and grass cuttings, polythene, extending. So it took over the course of 3 years, I'm gradually spreading the area into a full bed, basically. So a month later, potatoes doing nicely. This is spreading. We've got peas growing here in the raised beds. Wood chip. Basically, well, I was on a mission to get rid of the grass because I don't like lawns and I can't be asked with to mow them, basically. So that I ended up with free wood chip and I spread it to make paths, and because I had so much cardboard, I spread it and covered everywhere. So anyway, so this area here was now ready to plant with squash, and later, not that year, it's just squash there. So we've got 4 squash plants. Again, cardboard, and I cut holes for the squash to go in. Made a little mound of compost, and then again, this is grass, mulched, grass cuttings. If you lay about up to 1 inch of it, it works really well. It forms a nice matting, which dries out. It feeds the ground underneath, it keeps the weeds at bay, and it keeps the light off potatoes later when they're forming. So grass cuttings, you'll see, feature. Here's some fresh ones, here's some dry ones. So yes, great, okay. And talked far too much, you're going to keep me on time, aren't you? So that's later. Yes. Okay, excuse me, I've said all this without. Great. Okay, so this is later that year from the other end. Here's the potatoes, and here's a second squash plant, delicata squash, spreading, covering the ground, blocking the light. Here's some polythene that I've spread over to that area for the next beds. Brilliant. Okay. So that's the view from the other end, and okay, that's what I was getting. So September, this is the first potato harvest, which we were very happy with. The squash, as you can see, has just been free to spread out, and that really helps to block the light, as you can see. Okay. And autumn, squash harvested. This bed is now very nicely weed-free. I mean, there will always be a few weeds. Weed seeds get blown over. Some of the grass cuttings have weed seeds, but relatively very nicely weed-free, this area, which I later composted, ready for the next spring. Okay, and as you can see, the dead plants, I actually left them as a mulch, chopped them up and spread them around, and as you can see, more polythene here, spreading, and 2 more beds here, more wood chip, ever expanding. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so the next spring, as you can see, here's that same area, more grass cuttings, more wood chip. This little bit is some compost I've laid ready for this new bed, which is for tall peas. Now, in this case, I was late. I laid the compost about 2 weeks before I actually planted the peas. They were grown inside, so they were about a few inches tall, and they were fine. They did really well. So that's there. More cardboard, wood chips. Okay. And the second year of potatoes, this shows you a bit better. Grass cuttings mulched up. They're going nicely. And again, cardboard, because I got obsessed with it and had so much. What I do with the grass cuttings is spread them out in a fine layer so they dry nicely, because you don't want them too thick or they'll turn into slime. Okay. So June, okay. Completely useless. Absolutely. 10 minutes kept the sparrows off. This was sparrows on the peas. Here are the peas. The sparrows, yeah, literally 10 minutes that lasted. And the CDs, again, completely useless. So what I had to do was, in the end, cover it with mesh like this, because they just, and even the little sparrows would get stuck inside and fly around. But that's okay. Anyway, so, but it was a bit of fun. So, Okay, so potatoes doing nicely here, squash and corn growing together here, which was an experiment which worked well, except you want to get the timing right, because I ended up with really tall corn and squash climbing up, and I had to wade through to get to the corn, which was delicious, but I had to plan it ahead several hours. Anyway, so as you can see, and over here, actually, I don't know who was at Kate's talk, but this at the end here is I left as a wildlife area. There's a nice big pile of just stuff in the corner there, but gradually still spreading, expanding. Okay, so okay, relax. That was July. Here's the corn growing. Here's the peas now covered. More wood chip spread here. Okay. And there, okay, so the fall, this is the second autumn. As you can see, we've moved over to this area. Here's the squash ripening on the plant. Potatoes are under here, ripening. Cardboard spreading out to the end here. This is some wildflower, a wildflower patch which I started, which grows very nicely through wood chip. This year it's gone a bit crazy, so it looks relatively tidy here. Now you'll see that it's not my garden, our garden is not a tidy garden. Some people might want theirs more tidy, but I care about good veg. Anyway, so yes, so this is the other side here, more cardboard, more grass, tomatoes growing up the peepholes, and again the potatoes under there. Okay. So the following year, last summer, again spread out nicely, preparing the ground, cardboard down here. You can be quite slapdash in a way with this. I mean, it's good to cover the area nicely and make sure there are no gaps, but if you just chuck bits of cardboard down in the general area, if that's all you have time to do and leave them and weight them down, then you end up with something in a few weeks. The grass dies down really quickly. Actually, it's quite surprising. Now, something important that I've forgotten to tell you about cardboard, take the tape off, all that packing tape. Definitely worth taking it. It's a bit of a pain, but definitely take it off, because I didn't, and I'm still finding tape blowing around and several inches down, plastic tape. So yeah, don't do what I did. Okay. So can anyone see spot the difference? Yes. This is what grows. Yes. A polytunnel's magically popped up. So yeah, so this is the third summer in full production. So something interesting I'm going to point out here. So you've got wildflowers growing here. We've got potatoes are now here this year. Peas and runner beans, peas, 4 beds. Now along this side, because the polytunnel required some digging, which was the first time I dug in this garden, to bury the anchor plates, earth was disturbed and some of it ended up here. And by this time, I was thinking, why are there all these weeds along here that weren't there before? And then it took me quite a few weeks to realise, because of digging. Proof. So anyway, couldn't really avoid that. So, okay. Right, so that's inside the polytunnel. This I want to show you. So mulching the path as well as the beds is recommended. Again, more grass cuttings and comfrey just chopped up on the beds and paths. How are we doing for time? Are we all right for time? 5. Okay. I won't, because I want to leave time for questions. We're almost there. So this is in full flow, a Nodig polytunnel with lovely tomatoes and cucumbers. And we're okay. And that's what I'm going to end with. Needs no explanation.